You can use the rules-standards distinction to categorize any law or regulation that you learn for the rest of your law school career. To understand this distinction, consider a classic example of speed limits. A law regulating driving speed could require drivers to drive less than 40 miles per hour, or they might require drivers to drive at a reasonable speed. The former kind of injunction is a rule. The latter is a standard. The 40 miles per hour speed limit is a rule because it's clear, objectively measurable, and most importantly, knowable in advance, ex ante. In contrast, the drive at a reasonable speed law is a standard. A standard is a law that is fuzzier than a rule. With standards, it's harder to know in advance how a judge or agency will evaluate a particular setting. Was driving at a speed of 40 miles per hour reasonable given that fog was reducing somewhat normal visibility? Laws that turn on what is reasonable or prudent tend to be standards. With a standard, you might not know whether you violated the law until after a court has adjudicated the issue. If you look closely, you'll see that every expression of a legal right or duty will fall into one of these categories. Any law can be categorized either as a rule or as a standard. So, as you encounter each new holding of a case or each new statutory provision, you can ask yourself, is this law a rule or a standard? Should it be a rule or a standard? Sometimes a law might be expressed as a rule when a standard would be better suited to the situation, or vice versa. Sometimes it's better to use both a rule and a standard. Indeed, most jurisdictions require highway motorists to drive 55 miles or fewer miles per hour and to drive prudently, which in bad weather might be considerably slower than 55 miles per hour. You should also understand that rules versus standard distinction, you should understand this distinction while presented as a dichotomy, it's often more of a continuum. Consider the law regarding the contract price in the absence of an expressed term. What should be the default understanding, the presumptive price, if neither party mentions it in the contract? More specifically, should the law adopt a rule or a standard? On the standards end of the spectrum, the contract law might establish that the default price should be a reasonable price and depend on the totality of the circumstances. At the rule end of that same continuum, a jurisdiction might instead specify that the price for a particular good or service will be $100. Somewhere in the middle would be a rule that says the default price is the market price on the day of the performance. The market price default is more rule-like than totality of the circumstances default, but more standard-like than the $100 default. The Uniform Commercial Code has adopted the standard-like reasonable price default via the UCC section 2305. But instead of using a more rule-like default to cover instances where a contract fails to mention the contract quality, the default quantity price under the UCC is effectively zero. It's more of a rule than a standard. If your contract fails to name a price, contract law assumes you want a reasonable price. If your contract fails to mention quantity, contract law assumes you want to trade 0 items. Why would the law choose a standard to govern the default price, but a rule to govern the default quantity? Training yourself to think of laws as rules or standards is a powerful tool to help you both describe and critique the cases you encounter. Try to think of a constitutional provision that is relatively rule-like and another provision that is more of a standard. Think about the holding of the last case you read in any class. Did the court articulate a rule or a standard? What is it about the holding that tells you where the holding falls on the rules-standard continuum? When should standards be preferred to rules? That's your homework.